The more things change, the more they seem to stay the same. It's been very interesting seeing how much people have been like accepting the success of New Super Mario Bros. Seeing people like celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Star Fox Zero. Seeing people talk about all Nintendo's epic W's over the past year. It's very easy to forget that for some people, it's still 2016, and they still think they can complain about Shigeru Miyamoto. This is like one of the most transparently obvious, surface level, transparent, fake fan things there can possibly be. You know, blaming Miyamoto for things that happen at Nintendo just because he's Miyamoto, okay? Like, let's not take into consideration that, like, you know, there are entire teams under him. Let's not take into consideration that he hasn't been actively involved in game development since, like, 2013. Let's, like, not pay attention to the fact that, like, you know, Illumination was very heavily involved with the Super Mario Galaxy movie. Like, it wasn't just Miyamoto going in there and telling them what to do. Like, it was a partnership, you know? Like, a very good partnership. But, like, we're kind of in this, like, period where people want to do the George Lucas thing, where they want to blame Miyamoto for everything that goes wrong with the brand, even when it doesn't really make any sense. Like, you know, I've seen, like, especially deranged people try and blame him for, like, the Pokemon thing. You know, Pokemon is a second-party Nintendo franchise. Like, Miyamoto has not had that much influence since, like, I don't know, since, like, the pre-Gen 1 days. You know, like Miyamoto is, it's very, very interesting to kind of see, like, how people like Clownfish TV or, like, will try and make these weird, like, copes and statements about Miyamoto. Like, I have seen a lot of people over the past several weeks, like, do this thing where they kind of want to, like, pretend that Miyamoto's getting old and that he's losing his grip and that he doesn't know what he's doing. You know, like, you know, a lot of people are doing this thing where, like, they're pretending the Mario movies are huge disasters. And that's just very clearly, observably not true. Okay, both of them have grossed over $1 billion. You know, both of them are gonna go on to be, like, all-time animated film classics. You know, like films like Puss in Boots 2 can't even hope to compete. Like, again, the difference in quality is, like, staggering. But we're kind of in that early phase where, like, boomers just don't want to admit it. That Miyamoto's approach to filmmaking does make a lot of sense. And this is very transparent when you, like, see him, like, make statements. You know, he had this thing. You know, Illumination knows more about Mario than we do. Now, that seems like a weird thing to say, right, coming from, like, Shigeru Miyamoto. But, again, people don't seem to understand that Miyamoto works with a team, okay? If you watch the original Super Mario Bros. Movies, what you get, the original Super Mario Bros. Movie, like, what you get is something that's rooted very much in, like, old school Nintendo stuff. You know, it's rooted in, like, takes a lot of influence from, like, the Western cartoons, right? It, you know, adapts the characters, it evolves them, and incorporates, like, relatively obscure lore, right? Like, what you see is, like, you know, Illumination taking all these, like, random factoids about Mario and just kind of, like, putting it into a blender and making it, like, immaculate, okay? Again, there isn't some, like, grand design for, like, the Mario brand, okay? Like, it's always meant to be fun, it's always meant to be uplifting, it's always meant to be, like, you know, this wild ride, and Miyamoto understands how to work with other creators. You know, I think we saw this with, like, Mario Rabbids back in 2017, and we're seeing it now with these guys, okay? Where Illumination really is shining because of their ability to work with the license in creative ways, okay? The Star Fox thing that everyone loved, that was their idea. Like, obviously, Miyamoto approved it, but, like, you know, he didn't introduce the idea, and he was kind of apprehensive, and in the end, it worked out very, very well. So what we're seeing now is that more people are becoming aware of how good the Mario movies actually are, and they're, like, desperate to damage control them. They're desperate to control the narrative, and so they try desperately first of all, to pretend the movies are bad, and secondly, trying to blame Miyamoto for them, even though it is very, very apparent that Illumination is given a lot of leeway as to what they want to do with the characters. You know, it's very, very interesting to kind of see like the things they've been coming up with and how it's like quite a bit different than what Nintendo or Miyamoto does. It's a far cry to the narrative, okay? Because what we've been told since 2013, since Paper Mario Sticker Star came out, like, the narrative we've been told is that Miyamoto hates story, he hates people doing anything with these characters, he hates, like, anybody doing anything fun with the Mario brand, and that just hasn't happened, okay? Like, what we saw with the Mario Galaxy movie kind of, I think, defies that narrative, okay? And it's very, very interesting to see, like, where we're going, because right now, the giant cope is that Miyamoto is destroying Nintendo. Miyamoto is like ruining Mario. He's ruining the Mario brand. He's ruining the Mario movies. Like, Miyamoto is the worst thing to ever happen to Mario. Okay? Like, that's the narrative we're being force-fed right now. You know, that's the narrative we've been force-fed today. That's what we've been told for a long time. Miyamoto, what we're going to see over the next 10 years is that Miyamoto is going to retire or he's going to die, and we're going to see this weird flip, okay? It's going to be exactly like what happened when Reggie Fils-Aimé retired, in that, like, we see a lot of people who spent, like, the last, like, decade, like, clowning on Reggie, hating on him, you know, clowning on Iwata, hating on him. Like, you're going to see that weird flip, and people are going to start pretending this was, like, the golden age of Nintendo. You can actually see this right now in the community, where they'll try and tell you that, like, the Nintendo of 10 years ago was amazing and based and, like, the golden era of the company, when that was, like, the Wii U era, and everybody, like, you know, at the time thought they were, like, on the verge of bankruptcy. You know, again, it's, these kind of statements, this kind of rhetoric, this kind of ideology, it's very, very forced. It's very, very lazy. It's very, very much rooted in this idea that, like, Nintendo was good back in the day, you know, 10, 20 years ago, but they're not so good now. You know, they've fallen off, they've become obsolete, they've been outperformed by the Steam Deck, they've been outperformed by the PlayStation, you know, that they've been outperformed by the Sega Genesis. You know, that's always been the narrative, but we're at the point now where, like, the Nintendo of 20 years ago was, like, the GameCube era, the DS era, you know, games like New Super Mario Bros. And Twilight Princess, games that were, like, very clearly, like, extremely divisive when they came out, but have since gone on to be, like, all-time classics. You know, it's kind of Wind Waker syndrome, honestly. Like, I know Wind Waker is the title everyone points to when talking about this, but, like, what we're seeing a lot of lately is, like, people obsessively clowning on every Nintendo product as it comes out, like, creating the illusion that it's a lot more divisive than it actually is. And then over time, it becomes some beloved product, okay? You know, I grew up, you know, playing Twilight Princess. You know, I was looking forward to that for, like, 2 years. It finally comes out, I get a hold of it, and it's disappointing, okay? Like, again, I learned a valuable, like lesson from that, like, never get too overhyped for this stuff, but, like, again, I still enjoy the game, and I still go back to it regularly. Like, it's a game I have a lot of fond memories of. Most people have this mentality that, like, Nintendo's constantly putting out flops. Okay, that their games are constantly failing, that they're not reaching their target audience, that, like, kids don't play Nintendo, and that's just very observably not true. Okay, because New Super Mario Bros., I think, is a very good example of this, of, like, how something came out, you know, became this huge juggernaut success, sold DSs, sold like 30 million units, was this huge cultural phenomenon, and at the time it was just written off and ignored. And then people went on to write off and ignore the sequels as well. And the narrative became that New Super Mario Bros. Was this extremely derivative, uninspired thing that had way too many sequels when there were 4 of them, and we got more Assassin's Creed games in less time. Okay, you know, the original New Super Mario Bros. Came out in 2006, Assassin's Creed came out in 2007, and then we got 2, we got Brotherhood, we got, like, Revelations, we got 3, we got 4. Like, Assassin's Creed was a lazier, more rehashed IP than New Super Mario Bros. Ever was, and yet didn't get anywhere near the same amount of flack or criticism because of the image it had of being a mature IP. Like that was the reasoning behind it. People thought Assassin's Creed was way better than it was because of the tone, the style, the presentation, what it was about. But in actuality, New Super Mario Bros. Was way better than any of those games. We're seeing the same thing happen with the movies today. Because all the films that people are propping up as being better than Mario Galaxy, stuff like Into the Spider-Verse, Puss in Boots 2, I've seen people throw out like, Frozen. Like, people seem to think that like, this isn't going to be like a major industry like upset. Like, people really think that Nintendo is going to fail and eventually people will just stop going to see these Mario movies. And that, like, we'll see, like, the rightful return of, like, the mouse. It isn't going to happen. Spider-Man isn't as big as Mario. Elsa isn't as big as Mario. Like, Mickey Mouse isn't as big as Mario. Like, the simple fact of the matter is we're seeing, like, the end game collapse of the entire industry. Like, what we're seeing is, like, more and more people are becoming Mario fans, appreciating the brand, appreciating the creators, appreciating, like, the tone the games go for. And, like, a lot of these, like, weird complaints about, like, the series not being dark enough and not having enough story and, like, having too many things happen. Like, it's just, they really are effectively non-issues. If you really think about it. Like, if you really think about it for 2 seconds, like, there is no truly valid criticism of the Mario movies. Because all the criticism essentially amounts to, like, this idea that, like, the films are too fast-paced, there's too much happening, and, like, you can't get invested in what's going on. And it's, like, it's just one of those things where, like, people really underestimate the value of something like this. Because I was watching this, and it kind of dawned on me just how much better Mario Galaxy looks than Puss in Boots 2. Like, that cheap-ass, like, stop-motion style where, like, they have it run at, like, 30 FPS so they can just, like, skip frames and make it look, like, make more things happen without, like, actually animating it. Like, that sucks. That's lazy. That's cheap. That's, like, one step above those stupid Bayonetta, like model cutscenes where, like, the characters just kind of stand around and look at each other. Like, people try to sell this to you as an innovation. People try to tell you that, like, Spider-Verse innovated when they, like, cheaped out with this shit. We were told that, like, this was some innovative thing. Instead of just, having the characters move normally, actually having interesting visuals, actually having an actual movie. It's interesting whenever people talk about these movies and they start talking about why they're better than the Mario movie. And it really does come down to the idea that they tackle more adult themes. Okay? When people talk about Toy Story 3, it's like, oh man, the incinerator, it's like they're being sent to hell. And then when they go to the daycare center, it's like they've reached paradise. You see people talking about Puss in Boots 2 and how it's about anxiety and overcoming trauma and, like, facing your inevitable death. You see people talk about, like any of these movies. And they just do this thing where they hyperfixate on this idea that, like, these children's films are secretly really adult. And the thing people have a problem with when it comes to the Mario movies is that it doesn't really even try to do that. Like, it's just fun for kids. And, like, the more I think about it, the more I realize that this is something that has been sorely lacking in children's entertainment in the past, like, 40 years. Okay? Like, this is the kind of stuff, that made me love, like, SWAT Cats back in the day. Or, like, any of these really good, like, classic anime series. Like, it's not, like, the idea that, like, these shows have to be about, like, overcoming trauma or overcoming, like, your abusive family or, like, doing it, like, it really is limiting the potential for animation. Like, the idea that you can't make things like this because it's too childish is actively holding back the medium. And I find it very interesting how, like, Miyamoto seems to be the only person in the entire industry who like understands that. And he is absolutely hardcore for like, standing by his guns at this point. Because, he's questioned the critics, he's questioned the reception, he's questioned like the fans, complaining about this. And like he's right about all of it, honestly. Like people are misjudging this movie. And I think that fact is going to become more and more apparent over time. And I think what's also going to become more apparent is just how much of a savant, how much of a genius Shigeru Miyamoto actually was. Like 40 years in the industry, well, 45, probably a little bit longer than that. Like 45 years in the industry, and this guy is still putting out absolute bangers. Like Shigeru Miyamoto is the man, will never be topped. This guy not only dominated the world of video games, he's also dominated the world of film. The Legend of Zelda will be bigger than Lord of the Rings.